Hello and welcome to the Holistic Counselling and Psychotherapy Tutor. We've been looking at Clarkson's 5 relationships, and today we're going to have a little look at the transferential relationship as defined by Petruska Clarkson. My name's Saska. I am a psychotherapeutic counsellor and psychotherapist based in London. I'm also a tutor of counselling and a clinical supervisor. Many of my students have lots of questions around transference, and what you notice is that different theorists can explain it in slightly different ways. So quite often my students will ask, what is transference and countertransference? How does Clarkson explain it? How do we identify it in a therapeutic relationship and work with it? And how are we influenced by our influence and our understanding and making meaning of the transferential relationships in our therapeutic practice? If you're joining me today, do remember to like, follow, share. In previous videos, if you don't know about Clarkson's 5 relationships, it's an integrative relational framework from Petruska Clarkson, which has 5 relationships which are always potentially available to us in our therapeutic journeys with clients. And they are the working alliance, the transferential relationship, the reparative or developmentally needed relationship, the person-to-person relationship, and the transpersonal relationship. And today we're going to be looking at transference and countertransference in psychotherapy and counselling. So people like Greenson, 1967, considered the transferential relationship between therapist and client to be an essential part of the analytic process, since analysis consists of inviting the transference in, allowing transference to occur in the space, and gradually dissolving it through interpretation, helping clients gain awareness and meaning of their transferential place in the relationship. Additionally, transference is acknowledged to be the terrain on which basic problems of a given analysis play themselves out. So we can think of it, if we think about Petruska Clarkson and her ways of explaining transference, she clearly defines a proactive transference that can occur. And so transference is the projection from the client onto the therapist of past experiences. So when Petruska Clarkson is describing proactive transference, what she's referring to is the past experiences which the patient brings or the client brings into the relationship. Reactive transference, which is another form of transference that Clarkson defines, is the reaction from the client of something the therapist has employed. So if we think about examples perhaps of those two things, if we think about proactive transference, perhaps the client has historically had really bad experiences with authority or people with any kind of role power, and they come into therapy and they project onto you their beliefs or their kind of systems around role power because you are in a position of power in the relationship. Reactive transference is slightly different. It's when we're offering an intervention perhaps to clients and our client responds and reacts transferentially to what we have brought into the space. So we can run through that again. Proactive transference refers to the past experience that the client is bringing into the relationship. Reactive transference is the reaction of the client to ideas or concepts that are introduced by the therapist. So we can see proactive, past experience, how they're playing out in the room, and reactive transference, how the client is responding or reacting to ideas or interventions that the therapist has introduced. And then same again for countertransference. When we're thinking about countertransference, we're thinking about our responding to clients' material. So a proactive countertransference are the past experience that you or I or whichever therapist brings into the relationship. I am not a kind of blank screen. I come into therapy as a therapist with all of my knowledge, all of my experiences. My entire past is somehow there in the space. So my proactive countertransference will be all of the past experiences that I'm bringing into the relationship and how they play out in the relationship. Proactive countertransference. If we start to think about reactive countertransference, this is when I'm responding to my client's transference as if it's real. I'm reacting to what the client is bringing in terms of transference. So reactive countertransference arises when the therapist responds to the client's transferential distortions as if they were real. We react to the client's transferential process. So if we want to kind of think about a kind of other definition, we're talking about Clarkson, it's an integrative theory, we start to think about, but if we think about Laplanche, for example, definition of transference there, a process of actualization of unconscious wishes. Transference uses specific objects and operates in the framework of a specific relationship established with this object. In the transference, kind of infantile prototypes re-emerged and are experienced with a strong kind of sensation of immediacy. So we're talking there about the past and literally how it plays out transferentially in the present, in the therapeutic relationship with clients. And we can probably take, if we take another definition, we can perhaps look at Carl Jung, who says that the great importance of the transference has often led to the mistaken idea that it's absolutely indispensable for a cure, that it must be demanded from a client, so to speak. But a thing like that can be no more demanded than faith, which is only valuable when it's spontaneous. Enforced faith is nothing but spiritual crap. Anyone who thinks that he must demand a transference is forgetting that this is only one of the therapeutic factors. So when we think about Jung there, yes, he's saying that transference exists, right? The past does play out in the present. It will play out in a transferential relationship between client and therapist. But very clearly, he's saying, actually, it's not something that we can incite. It's not something we can welcome it in. We can acknowledge that it's there, but we cannot force a client to project onto us their experiences from the past and have them play out in the present. For him, he's saying it has to be this kind of spontaneous process that kind of occurs and is alive in the relationship quite naturally and quite spontaneously, not something we can force in any way, sense, shape or form. So it can be relatively simple to identify transference in the therapeutic relationship in its most simplistic terms. I'm assuming most of you are still training. In its most simplistic terms, it might be when clients are projecting attitudes onto you that you know actually are not your own. They're not coming from your adult ego state, that the client is giving you perhaps qualities or characteristics that perhaps you don't own. I guess a very simple and nice example of this is almost this idealizing transference that can occur for clients. They're placing you in a space that actually you perhaps don't belong. And it can take time then, can't it? Because when we're starting out with therapy, there is a role power that's often projected onto us or placed in us on the parts of clients. And it can take time to kind of dissolve that. And it dissolves quite naturally in the room. And we try and establish a much more equal power dynamics with clients who want to kind of develop that person-to-person relationship, that I-thou relationship, rather than this kind of I-it dynamic, which often, this is Buber, by the way, which often involves projections onto you or transference in the relationship. When we start thinking about working with our own counter-transference, for me, this is very much about self-awareness and reflection and knowing what is yours and what belongs to the client. Really important to kind of have that separation so that we're not acting in on the client's acting out in any way, shape or form. We have to know who we are in that space at that particular time for that particular client with the entirety of our own history so that we can recognize our own counter-transferential response. I'm touching myself here, so this can be quite a somatic experiencing for therapists. So in terms of disentangling the counter-transference that can occur, whether that's proactive or reactive, it really does involve self-reflection, self-awareness, and a real kind of knowing of yourself. And obviously clinical supervision can help. So if you're concerned about anything in terms of the transferential relationship with clients, it's something that you're able to bring to supervision. And supervision really help you to look at what is going on there. That's it for today. Thank you for watching our short video on transference and how that operates within Petruska Clarkson's 5 relationships. In our next video, we will be looking at the reparative or the developmentally needed relationship. So please do join me for that. Please remember to like, follow, and share. Thank you for listening.